On this episode of the Star Trek Universe podcast, we are continuing with our Picard Primer, covering Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2, right after this.
Welcome to Star Trek Universe Podcast. My name's Matthew Carroll.
I am David C. Robertson.
Hey, buddy. How are you tonight?
Hey, man. I'm all right.
Good. Me too. I went to see a horror movie, so I'm in a bit of a weird mood. You know,
what horror movie?
Countdown? Have you heard of this?
Oh, no.
It's like a movie about an app where you download it and it tells you your time till death. It's basically like a Final Destination type thing, but everybody has their own time. They were supposed to die and their clock. Right. It's classic screenwriting in that there's always a ticking clock, you know? Mm-hmm. And it had some interesting twists and turns, and I enjoyed it.
Well, cool, man.
Pretty predictable, but, you know, it's a horror movie. What do you want? What do you want, Dave?
That's weird that you're talking about, that you mentioned Final Destination. My sister-in-law's in town, and the day that she was supposed to come in, like her flight kept getting delayed, and they kept finding something wrong with the plane, and then going to a different plane, and then there's something wrong with that plane, and then going to a different plane.
Oh, no.
There's like constant stuff like that. And the tack they took was like, oh man, God really needs you here. And I was like, or you've cheated death and it's a Final Destination situation.
Stop trying to freak out your sister-in-law.
Like, don't be driving behind a truck with any logs, Christy.
That actually happened in this movie too, which I felt like was a homage.
Oh no.
Well, it wasn't. No, they weren't driving behind a truck. It's just a tree limb went through a truck or whatever.
Okay.
Anyway, let's get into Best of Both Worlds.
Okay, cool.
This episode surprised me.
How did it surprise you, Matt?
Well, before I get into that, let me tell a quick breakdown of what happens in this episode, because we're trying to do that to make
the way I said it, it was just like I was putting on my bullshit hat. Like, all right, let's see what kind of crap you got this time.
You were putting a bullshit hat on me, is what you were doing.
I was preparing myself. I was bracing for the bullshit impact.
No, I do have reasons I was surprised.
But yeah, I don't know why I'm acting like that, because I don't think we normally have that dynamic where you're just like spouting crap and I'm like shooting it down or something. I don't think that's. Maybe I'm in a weird mood too. I
this
don't
isn't the MCU cast. I'm not Jeff.
Don't say stuff like that. I'm not supposed to laugh at that.
It'll get back to him now. I'm just teasing. Jeff's the best. I just wanted a good whipping boy for that joke. Okay.
He's the best whipping boy.
the best whipping boy. Yes. Okay. So this episode, if you don't know, if you know TNG, you know what this episode is. This is Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2. This is the episode where Picard becomes Locutus. I think this episode is so many things to me. I think you told me for you it was the first thing that ever taught you about a cliffhanger. Right?
Yeah.
And for me, it was like the first thing I ever remembered someone turning evil and having a different name. Which later, Angel, Angelus, like, it set up a lot of tropes in my brain that, like, this is, I remember distinctly having to, like, learn the name Locutus, like, it's like, oh, Locutus, interesting. Who's that? Oh, it's Picard in Borg form. I don't know. It's such a seminal work for me. But the plot of this episode is the Borg finally reach Federation space. They destroy a colony and the Enterprise, responds and is then attacked by the Borg. The Borg show a special interest in Captain Picard from the very beginning. They say they want them to surrender Captain Picard, and then they kidnap him with their transporter technology. And by the end of that first episode, it comes on screen that Picard has been taken by the Borg and transformed into a Borg named Locutus. Lots of shenanigans go. They go back and forth between the ships, different incursion parties. But the Borg ship continues on its course while the Enterprise has been disabled. And they have the Battle of Wolf 359, which I was interested in the fact that, like, the Battle of Wolf 359 was very underwhelming in this episode. I guess...
Well, yes, it happens off screen entirely.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I just have such a memory of it from Deep Space Nine. And it's been mentioned in so many books and movies. And like Wolf 359 is just such a big part of the universe. It's such a fixed point in the universe for me that I expected it to be a big battle in this episode, but it's completely off screen.
Yep.
So, they have the Battle of Wolf 359, they destroy a bunch of Federation ships, and then they're headed to Sector 001, also known as Earth, and they figure out that they can use Locutus, or Picard, to communicate with... They kidnap Picard back. Locutus says it is a tactical mistake to have taken him. He's a useless pawn or whatever, but they use him to communicate back to the Borg and put them all to sleep, which allows them to defeat the Borg. Right as they're about to take Earth, I guess. The thing that surprised me more than anything about this episode is this is not a Picard episode.
I would say the first. I don't know, fourth or a little more is a Picard episode, and it transitions to a Riker episode pretty quickly.
I would disagree with that assessment just because, like, from the very beginning of this episode, yeah, Picard's in it, he's awake, but, like, it's still about Riker. Like, there's more conversations, even in the first quarter, about Riker becoming a captain, and he keeps talking about how maybe he's scared of the big chair, and this new, I forget her name, you might know it.
Shelby,
yes, that's right. Lieutenant Shelby wants to be Commander Shelby, and she wants to take over for Riker on the Enterprise, and she says she's in his way. Like, almost everything in the first part of this episode is an interplay between Shelby and Riker, and how she is the new hotness and he's the old shit, and he needs to step down and let her do her thing. And then, you know, he ends up stepping up as captain once Picard has been taken away. And then the entire episode is pretty much a Riker episode. I feel like Picard's in the first quarter, but this episode isn't about him.
Well, you know, there's the whole bit where he's touring the ship before, you know, the oncoming battle. That's true. He has that whole conversation with Guinan, wondering if, you know, whoever that was, when he saw the Visigoths knew that Rome was about to fall, etc. Like, he had some really good stuff,
right?
And I think it was important stuff, but yeah, there was a lot of Riker here.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I know for a fact, the next episode is Family, which is about Picard and the effects, the kind of fallout this episode is going to have. But I feel like for the Picard series, you know, we keep talking about what does this episode tell us about Picard? And the events of this episode are important, obviously, especially seeing what we've seen about the new series and what it's going to be about, it seems, with all as much Borg stuff is in there. But the actual characterization of Picard isn't really enhanced as much by this episode. It's more about Riker, which I found incredibly interesting. And what is most interesting is if I were to watch this episode, this two-parter, I would assume Riker is gone. Wouldn't you?
No, actually.
Really?
The way that the fandom handled this episode, and I don't know how true it is, just looking into it here, but a lot of the fandom actually looked at it and thought Patrick Stewart's contract might be up. And he's haggling for more money, and they very well may replace him with Riker and have Shelby step up as commander. So there was that concern among the fandom, and that even propelled this season finale to really amp up for the next season amongst the fandom. I remember not knowing what they were gonna do with it. Like, I was I had already seen little retrospectives and stuff about different television series. I'd already seen, that season 4 ender on MASH, where I think it was season 4, where Colonel Blake is sent home, but his plane is shot down. And the last thing we see is radar come in and inform everyone that his plane got shot down and there were no survivors. So I was very cognizant of the fact that main cast members can sometimes die if something happens.
Sure. I just, I mean, yes, I would have thought that at the end of episode part 1. I'm talking about the end of episode part 2.
Oh, at the end of part 2,
he has become, Riker has become captain for half the episode, and to me, Riker has at least emotionally accepted that it's time to move on. He says as much multiple times in the episode where he's like, I've been scared to move on, and I didn't, and now maybe it's time that I do. And I'm sure that's probably a theme they play with in later episodes, because he obviously sticks around for at least 4 more years. 4 more years of Riker. Sorry. But, it just interested me because, after the end of this part 2, it just felt like Riker, he's a captain now. He took the captain's chair during one of the most important moments of Federation history and stopped the Borg. Like, this is Riker stopping the Borg. I'm sure Picard fought through the programming and helped, but it's Riker making the calls here.
Yeah, the real reason that storyline happened in the Best of Both Worlds is because Michael Piller was about to move on and was wondering if he was actually going to step down and find work somewhere else, because he felt like it was time to move on, and he was kind of going, what the hell is going on? Why am I still here? And should I move on? So he has said that, or he did say, everything that happened with Riker's character, and as far as him arguing back and forth with himself, was basically him arguing with himself over whether he should stay. And he did stay. Roddenberry convinced him to stay on.
That's interesting.
Yep. But yeah, at the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 2, Riker says, my career is my business. And I don't remember how it plays out in family, because we know we've got like 5 or 6 weeks of refit for Enterprise.
Right. I'm assuming he at least stays on while Picard goes home to France to visit his family. He's at least going to stay on through that, and it's just a matter of what happens after that. What convinces Riker to stay? And I'm sure I'll watch it soon. I think
the most telling bit about how or why Riker stays is the same thing that Michael Piller told himself when Troy says to Riker, "This is the happiest I've ever seen you."
It's an interesting part of his character, and it's an interesting question, that ambition versus happiness is what he's struggling with, because I think he is very happy in his role where he is. He loves working under the captain. He's comfortable, as he says in the episode, but he's not reaching his full potential. We see him in his full potential in this episode, I think. And he's a good captain.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it watching this episode. Would I watch a Next Generation, or would I be happy with a Next Generation where Riker has become the captain? And I think I could have been okay with that.
Yeah, I think I could have.
Yeah. But, I think this episode also does a really good job of, showing the dynamic between the father-son dynamic between Riker and Picard. The son who's sort of dependent on the father and has to basically take him down. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really cool through line for those two. And I think it'll probably come up in Star Trek Picard.
Oh yeah, I think so for sure. I think his relationship with his career versus his happiness. Now he's sitting on a farm. I can't imagine. I can imagine if a different world where he ended up as an admiral and did a lot more with his career, but it looks like he gave up on all that and went and lived on a farm with Troy, and probably had some kids. I think in the trailer we hear them talk about their kids.
Yeah, well, he's old enough. He could have retired, man.
Well, sure, but we've also seen people of his age as admirals, and I could absolutely see him still doing that if he'd chosen that path, but that's not the path he chose. I would like to see them cover that in the new show. I do think that'd be really interesting. And that's my main surprise of this episode, is really it's way more of a Riker episode than it is a Picard episode, which I think is still important for the series we're about to watch. And the events are obviously incredibly important. Not to mention, this is the first time we see someone assimilated, which I didn't realize. I didn't realize Picard is the first on-screen assimilation.
Oh, yeah. Even the characters say that we just thought that they were after the technology.
Yes, exactly. This all kind of blurs together from watching it in order as a kid. And I guess I just remembered the Borg being a pretty well-formed idea when I stumbled upon them. And it just seems like they were still building them. And Locutus is the first... And the reason they assimilate him is, they say, because they're going to, use him to speak to the rest of the Federation as they take it over. It doesn't seem, even in this episode, like necessarily they're going to be turning a bunch of people into Borg.
Oh, it totally does. They basically say, like, our culture is going to be assimilated, and because we're based on we're based on a structure that has a hierarchy of individuals that we answer to, they are going to have the captain of the most formidable ship in the fleet act as their voice.
Yeah, that's true.
And by the way, Locutus is Latin for one who speaks.
Oh, neat. That's really neat. That's really neat. Overall, I like this episode a lot. It's definitely a lot of fun. And jumping forward, because we covered a season 2 episode, Measure of Man, which was great. Then we covered an season 1 episode, and they're good. I like them, but they felt much less, I guess. I don't know. They felt like they hadn't found their voice yet, and they felt just kind of cheesier in general. And this was a huge leap forward. Season 3 of this show is a huge leap forward from season 1 and 2. And I think we talked about the designs of the ship and how things get a more neutral palette as they move forward. And this episode is a much more neutral palette. And I actually liked this aesthetic a lot. It feels grounded to me, but I know that you've talked about not liking the lack of color as it moves on. But I think this episode in particular was pretty neutral in its color palette.
Well, but it's still brightly lit. It's still got the walls and the atmosphere on the ship are still earth tones. They're still warm colors.
That's true.
And they've still got big splashes of color. Kind of laced throughout.
It's definitely not as white as some ships or whatever, as we see going forward in sci-fi in general, really. It's still got a lot of color left over from the 60s aesthetic of the original series.
What I don't like is just the militaristic battleship gray type of aesthetic.
Right.
I'm just that's so boring.
Yeah.
But, if you want to hear me wax on color for a while, go listen to my Man of Steel review on DC on Screen. And you'll never want to hear me talk about it again.
Yeah. That's for sure. I've heard that review. Yeah. So let's see. Any other things we learn in this episode about the main characters we've talked about? What else do we learn about the Borg that you think might be important for this new series?
Well, this is the first time they're modulating their shield frequencies to fight them.
Absolutely. It's a huge... The entire strategy of fighting the Borg by trying to change your you have to constantly adapt your strategy because they constantly adapt their shields. That's originates in this episode, which is real cool. Actually, no, that's not true. It's the first time they cycle their shields, but it is not the first time they adapt. It's not the first time the Borg adapt. They adapt in Q-Who.
But this is the first time, Worf says he's come up with a plan for modulating the shield frequencies.
I think it was Shelby. Right?
I thought it was Worf.
Oh, I think it was Shelby because she's the expert on the Borg. I think she comes up with most of these tactics for fighting them, which was cool. I thought two things. If this had been a different universe, I honestly can see a show where Riker becomes captain and Shelby becomes his first officer, and they just move forward. And maybe even Picard becomes Locutus and is now the voice of the Borg, and we see him once a season when the Borg attack. Like, I can see that universe existing. But an alternate universe, since I knew I knew how things move forward past now, I was for sure Shelby was going to die.
Oh.
And I guess she may have more to do. She may have more episodes. I don't know.
No, she doesn't. She winds up as a character being a part of Peter David's New Frontier books.
Oh, really?
And we track her progress there into the Admiralty.
Neat. I always wanted to read those. It just seemed interesting to like really build a separate crew in the books.
Yeah. Also present in those books is Ashley Judd's character from The Next Generation, Robin Leffler, Wesley's girlfriend.
Huh. Fun. That is fun. Well, overall, the Borg definitely seemed like a more well fleshed out idea in this episode than we've seen them in the past.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I thought so. I thought the Borg were really interesting. They had a lot to do with their adaptability and Federation's seemingly useless tactics against them. I thought that was a lot of fun. And they had to end up winning through trickery, which, again, this is something that probably won't work again. So it still feels like the Borg are this looming threat that they don't really have an answer for.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's part of the great part. That's part of the great thing about the end of the two-parter is, for just a second, you're like, oh, everyone's happy and back on the ship and blah, blah, blah. And then just Picard just is about to sip his tea and then just stops. And that creepy music comes on and he just like walks through the window and stares out upon the void. It's just, it's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the big thing. Like we know, because we've seen everything else up past this. This is a huge moment for Picard. This is not something... I feel like there's a lot of things in this series where the characters go through and it just kind of... They brush it off. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. This is not something that's brushed off by Picard at all.
I would argue that the episode itself, until that last bit, really struggles to give what has happened to Picard any kind of weight. Like... At the end, after the initial shock of seeing him as Locutus in part one, like the next episode, the way they pick it back up is just like, yep, he's Locutus, and we're not jumping into the him being stripped of his individuality. We're not they did attempt to give us a little something with like seeing the single tear roll down his cheek as he's being assimilated.
Oh man, that kind of broke me. That was rough. Actually, Alyssa, my girlfriend, was watching this with me, and she does not really care about Star Trek too much. She's starting to, because I'm watching like tons of TNG right now. But she was watching that. She was like, that got me. Like, that was rough. She even like was really emotionally impacted by that tear rolling. Ugh.
Yeah, that was a good tear.
Horrifying.
Yeah, and I don't feel like we really get to the meat of how bad it was for him until First Contact, honestly. And we get to it a bit in the next episode, Family, when he breaks down with his brother. We'll talk about that later. But,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I felt like they were struggling a bit in episode 2, and part of that is I know that Michael Piller said that like he was basically sitting there trying to write himself out of a hole because he didn't expect to be coming back in the next year.
That's awesome. So I feel like we've talked about Picard, we've talked about Riker, we've talked about Shelby, we've talked about the Borg. Any data things we learned in this that we might affect the way Picard moves forward?
Well, much in contrast to how it was presented in First Contact. Locutus tells Data that he was inferior and he would be rendered obsolete in the New Order.
Oh yeah, that's true.
There is that.
It's interesting. Let me ask you this Picard question: do you think we'll see Guinan?
I sincerely hope so.
Me too.
I have always wanted to know what the hell was up with Guinan. We had information from Q, who said she's not what she appears to be.
She's an imp.
she did some kind of weird magic thing with her hands.
Yeah, she's the only person we've ever seen take on Q in like a sort of physical manner. She actually like puts up like wizard hands and fights Q.
Yeah, it was weird. And then in this episode, in Best of Both Worlds, she explains, or Best of Both Worlds Part 2. By the way, I love all of her conversation with Riker in the captain's study.
Me too. I liked it a lot.
But she tells Riker, our relationship is beyond friendship, beyond family, and I will let him go. And you must do the same. There can only be one captain.
Yeah. All of that stuff was great. All that stuff was really great. And so I really hope that they can get Whoopi Goldberg to come back. I don't see why they couldn't, unless she just really doesn't want to, because, you know, she's not acting these days. I know she's on The View or whatever, but like, come be Guinan, like one of the most beloved characters you've ever played. Come do this. I would love to see her back. I'd love for them to really get into who she is, but I have a feeling they're going to leave that a mystery to some degree.
I mean, they might. They might. They've got 3 seasons that they're planning, so.
But, you know, she has a real hatred for the Borg. You know, as much as Guinan can hate, she's pretty amicable, but, you know, her people were destroyed by the Borg. Yeah. And so I'd really like to see, you know, a reaction of a Guinan who is seeing the Borg become unplugged and maybe become individuals again and trying to forgive the Borg. Like Guinan having a hard time to forgive the Borg would be a really interesting thing to see in the new Picard show.
I agree. What do you make of, like, because we had some of that some of this in the previous episode where the Borg are just like showing up and like lifting entire towns out of the dirt.
I mean, it's the thing they do. For the first 3 episodes they're in, Neutral Zone, which is just hints of them. That's all they do is they lift bases off the ground. And then Q-Who, when they jump into the like distant, you know, somewhere in the distant some distant quadrant.
Delta Quadrant.
Is it the Delta Quadrant?
Yeah.
When they jump into the Delta Quadrant, they see, you know, communities or like some sort of bases that have just been lifted up. So the first experience they have with the Borg is the same thing. And then this, you know, it makes perfect sense. The first thing you see in this episode is a big matte painting of a crater. Colony that has been just turned into a crater. So that's just how they work. That's what they do. They like attach a tractor beam to an entire colony and rip it out of the ground. That's how they assimilate, as far as we know. Now, I don't think we ever see that again.
Well, I also don't think we've ever seen an actual like planet be assimilated or whatever. Like,
that's a good point.
Every time we've seen them ever since, it was just them taking over ships.
As far as I remember. But I think the whole lifting colonies off the ground becomes a little bit. I think this episode gives the Borg their reputation for what they actually do, and then they kind of change their game plan for what the Borg really do after this episode. Yeah. And I think this is the first Borg episode, the first really fully cooked Borg episode.
Yeah. So you think the Borg, you know, change their strategy as they are wont to do?
Well, I mean, sure, that can be the headcanon.
As far as I can tell, the Federation is the only people who's ever beaten them.
Possibly. I mean, species 8759 or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
In Voyager.
4872, I think.
4872, thank you. I could not remember that 4-digit number.
Or maybe it was 8472.
Yeah, I don't remember. I want to say it started with an 8, but I really don't know. It's just a wild guess, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it was 8472. But I think they were relatively new to the Borg even then.
Sure, absolutely.
Where it was like, oh no, we found somebody who's effing us up pretty bad, y'all. Beep, beep, boop, boop.
I'm looking forward to rewatching some of that too. It's been a long time. Okay. Now, anything else? You got any quotes you wanted to throw out?
I think I've said most of the quotes that I was really impressed by.
Well, then you got any trivia?
I do have a lot of trivia.
What's your favorite trivia here?
They were already talking about doing the Queen Bee idea at this point.
Interesting.
Michael Piller completely resisted it. He says, "To me, there was something special and frightening about the Borg that their lack of character brought. For a show that dwells and specializes in character to be challenged and possibly destroyed by a characterless villain seemed to me to be a special kind of threat. But when we started talking about the cliffhanger and the Borg, we really did talk about who was going to be the Queen Bee." And then they went, "I've got it, Picard will be the Queen Bee."
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I often wondered about that, and it seemed like Picard is sort of a proto-queen. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
At one point in the script, Picard and Data were going to be combined as one Borg unit.
Oh, weird. That's a weird idea. I dig it, though.
And Michael Piller said, someone said they should do this, and we didn't have a good answer, or why would they do this? And we didn't have a good answer, so we dropped that idea.
That's a good thing.
Yep. I talked about that. I usually kind of weave in some of this trivia through our discussion.
Sure. We always like to have a moment at the end to give you any opportunity you didn't get to weave anything in. Cool.
So, Assistant Director Chip Chalmers, he said that...
What a name.
Yeah, I know. He says, "I remember the moment when Patrick Stewart, dressed in a Borg outfit, first walks up to the view screen and says, 'I am Locutus of Borg.' He came on the set, everybody was wowed with what they had done to Patrick, and we got everyone settled down and did one rehearsal. All he had to do was walk up to the camera. He did so, and he towered over everyone. It was just so creepy and so spooky. And he said, 'I am Locutus of Borg. Have you considered buying a Pontiac?'"
Oh man, stories of him acting silly on set are really funny. On the Nerdist podcast, they talked a few times about the fact that apparently he would make sort of hitting on Wesley jokes in off takes. Because I don't know if you know that Chris Hardwick, who hosts the Nerdist podcast, was college roommates with
Will Wheaton.
Wheaton, thanks. Yeah, and so like he had Will Wheaton and Patrick Stewart on at the same time one time, and like they were picking on Patrick about how he used to, like, you know, on those off takes where they're doing rehearsals and shit, like Patrick Stewart would like make weird passes at Wesley Crusher.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
That's real weird and real funny. And would get you canceled these days, probably.
Oh, yeah. Which is funny because, like, even dating back to, like, season 1, I've seen, like, behind-the-scenes footage of Patrick Stewart just being ridiculous and hilarious. But, like, the staff will tell stories about how he was just like, "No, we shall do this seriously. There shall be no joking around." And then at some point he just finally, like, lightened up.
Yeah.
But I wonder when exactly that happened.
That's funny. I was just listening to Stephen Colbert telling a story of, he used to work, he was doing improv, and he was telling the story of doing improv with his friends. One was Amy Sedaris, I think, and then their other friend, and they're doing like improv early in their career. And Stephen Colbert was like super... like, we have to take this improv seriously. And he'd get really upset when people broke, you know, when people laughed on stage, things like that. He'd get really, like, really upset. And they would just ridicule him to hell because of his, like, because he was taking comedy so seriously, to some degree. And then he said there was one, they were on stage one time and everyone broke, and the scene, you know, fell apart. Of course, the audience loved it, but the scene fell apart, and Stephen Colbert, like, goes to his dressing room and he's, like, freaking out about how bad it was. And they just ridiculed him until finally he just started laughing and realized his entire life he'd been taking things so seriously, and like, oh, right, this is supposed to be fun. Like, we're supposed to have fun. So it sounds similar, like a similar story to what Patrick went through.
Yeah. Let's see. On the day the teaser scene was filmed for the first part, the production staff gathered for a group photograph with pretty much everyone involved in the making of the show, and this was the last crew photograph to include Gene Roddenberry before his death in 91.
Wow.
The nebula they go into is basically exactly the recycled images of the Mutara Nebula from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, I totally see that. That's fun.
As soon as I saw it, I was just like, oh, the Mutara Nebula. Nice. Okay, cool.
It'd be great if actually they had mentioned that it was the Mutara Nebula. That'd be that would have been wonderful.
Now here's a bit you're going to enjoy. The new weapons that Shelby mentions are in development by Starfleet to fight the Borg. It had to have included the USS Defiant, as well as the Battle Fleet, which the Defiant was supposed to be the prototype for.
Yeah.
Because Sisko in DS9 in the Search Part 1, he says that the plans for the Defiant began 5 years ago, prior to 2371, which would place it at the same time frame as this episode.
Neat. That's a lot of fun. That's really fun.
And, of course, in First Contact, it's established that the Queen was on board that cube that blew up at the end of Part 2. By the way, that cube, they had spent so much money they had spent so much money that they didn't really have a whole lot of money to build that cube. It wound up being like 2 feet by 2 feet. And they just took out a bunch of different models and stuff, of AMT models and all sorts of stuff, and pieces of old ships and whatnot. And they built the structure, they built a box, and they, the little frames, the little plastic frames that hold model pieces that you cut out.
Yeah, I was going to say it looks just like that.
Yeah, they cut that out and put that inside, and then just filled the box, the Borg cube box, and stuck on the outside all these different pieces from different models, and kept spray painting it.
That's great.
and then they blew it up, and they got it in one take. I thought that was really cool. The Wolf 359, all of the ship clutter from the aftermath of that scene are just a bunch of different ships from they just stuck together from different time frames, from different episodes. I can't remember what they called it now. My brain's gone loopy. But where they just took different starships from different series and different franchises and put them together and battle damaged them. Michael Okuda had a story about how he was altering some of those models and damaging them, and he's working on doing that. And Patrick Stewart just casually walks in full Locutus makeup to go Xerox something. And Okuda just looks up at him and holds up the model and goes, "Look what you did." But I'm way more entertained by the idea of Locutus just walking around using a photocopier.
Yeah, Locutus just walking around Xeroxing things. That's weird. It's pretty great. Well, I think this was a really fun episode. It's a classic, it really is.
Yeah, man.
It's when I think of TNG and the biggest episodes of all time, this is on the list for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really great. And it established a lot of things, a lot of character moments, a lot of really cool stuff with the Borg, and I think this is going to be a key episode to what we see going forward. You got anything else, Dave?
I got a couple of things if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
In the Drumhead, in TNG's 4th season, Admiral Sadie states that the loss at Wolf 359 was 39 starships and nearly 11,000 lives. Shelby estimates in this episode that the fleet will be back up in less than a year after the battle, but they say they're still shorthanded all the way in Season 5's Redemption Part 2. And in Voyager's episode Death Wish, Q says that had Quinn not saved an ancestor of Riker's during the American Civil War, Commander Riker would not have been around to devise his brilliantly unique strategy against Locutus and the Borg, and as a result, the Borg would have surely assimilated the Federation.
That's fun.
Yeah. Just thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah.
They threw that in all those years later.
Yeah, I love it. It's one thing when you have an episode like this that's so seminal to the whole thing that it is legend to the characters in universe now. Mm-hmm. You know? I can't, it does kind of annoy me that he stays first officer after this because he really proves himself in command.
It doesn't matter, though. He knows he can do it, and that's no longer his issue. His issue is that he wants to stay because he loves the Enterprise. Sure. There's no experience. It's just like what Shelby asked him, is it true that, this serving on this ship is as extraordinary as I've heard? And he's like, oh, absolutely. They're on a deep space mission, a continuing deep space exploration mission. They come across stuff that most ships don't ever come across. Back when, the original Enterprise, or the Enterprise A, was on that kind of a mission. When Sulu got his own ship with the Excelsior, all they were doing was cataloging freaking gaseous anomalies. And they said in Star Trek 6 they've been doing that for a year.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I do understand that it's, a different thing, but it's still...
I think it was a year.
Still, I just feel like, he has he not only does he deserve to step up, but I feel like he's kind of wasting his talents as a first officer at this point. First officer is supposed to be sort of training for command, and he eventually he does. I think after the finale, I don't even think he leaves short. Does he leave right after the finale, or is he still first officer through all of the movies?
He is first officer through all of the movies. He is the first. He leaves to take command of the Titan after he marries Troy in Star Trek Nemesis.
That's right. I didn't know. But after
he doesn't want to leave, man.
Yeah,
and I understand. He's got a family there. He's got a family, and material wealth and status is not the is not the overriding principle. So
but it's not about material wealth. It's about wasting of your own talents, which, it's an interesting question. It's do you have a moral obligation to reach your potential?
By the way, I was wrong. Hikaru Sulu says, after 3 years, I have concluded my first assignment as master of this vessel, cataloging gaseous planetary anomalies in Beta Quadrant. What a shitty thing to do.
Yeah, that's not fun.
But yeah, I think Riker just loves the ship. He loves the adventures they have, and he loves his family. And he's, as Troy says, he's come to a point where he's comfortable with himself. He's comfortable with his position, and he's gotten to the point where it's more about self-exploration rather than blind ambition.
Right. Well, it's not. See, to me, that's not the question. I get it. I get that he's gotten over his blind ambition. I'd just like to hear how he eventually decided to take a command, and I'd like to hear that it's he got over his blind ambition. He maybe spent a few more years in the Enterprise than he could have. Obviously, he's already spent longer on the Enterprise than he could have at this point. But then he finally realized he was kind of wasting his potential because, ships need captains, especially after, they need a whole new fleet. They need experienced commanding officers, and he's kind of still living under Picard's skirts. I don't mean then that in a, he's not fulfilling his potential of material wealth or status. I mean he's not serving the best way he could. Is what I mean. I don't
think he feels that way, though. When you look at Generations, and he says, after the Enterprise D is crashed, he says, "I always thought I'd get a chance to command it." Purportedly, one would think, more than just a field commission, since he did command it a few times. But I think he didn't want to settle. He didn't want to settle for the Melbourne. He wanted the Enterprise.
Yeah, which that was a poignant moment in this episode when the Melbourne has been destroyed, and he realizes a survivor's guilt crosses his face. A really great moment.
Yeah, and he didn't want the Melbourne. He didn't want these other inferior ships. He wanted this crew, this family, this ship.
Yeah.
I think that's his motivation.
Yeah, I hear you. And it sounds like he never gets it. Which, obviously never gets the D. Never gets the E.
He gets the consolation prize of Troy.
Consolation prize.
Or a consolation prize.
Oh, no. I think that's all I got on this. You got anything else, Dave?
Nah, I'm good.
All right, guys. Well, we'll be back with you very soon with our next episode, which is going to be Family. Season 4, Episode 2. The next episode after this one, it's going to be about Picard. This is going to be where we really find out what's going on in Picard's brain. You know, like really find out what's going on behind the scenes of Picard's character. So I'm excited about that. We'll be back soon. Peace.
Live long and prosper.
To reach out to us, hit us up at StarTrekUcast.com, at StarTrekUcast on Twitter, or search for the Star Trek Universe Podcast on Instagram or Facebook. And if you want to hear more from David C. Robertson, search for the DC On Screen podcast in your podcast app now, or go to maladjusted.tv for his comedy sketches. If you want to hear more from me, Matthew Carroll, search for the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast or the Orville Universe podcast in your podcast app, or check out my music. Just search for Matthew Carroll wherever you listen to music.